Your presence has been detected and recorded. Thank you.
How you guys doing today? Thank every single one of you for showing up here today. Let me introduce myself because I'm sure that a lot of people out here don't know me. Don't know me from Adam unless you happen to see the last gun rally we had out here in January. King 5 got a good picture of me. They plastered up all over the internet. But I'm Chris Cord. I'm your local point of contact with the National Constitutional Coalition of Patriotic Americans, which is what we all are here. The NCCPA is a grassroots organization made up of patriots, just like each and every one of you, that care about the direction that our country is headed. We care about seeing the U.S. Constitution upheld as it was originally intended, not how many progressives would like to reinterpret it. And therefore we care deeply about defending the enumerated rights recognized within the Constitution, especially the Second Amendment. And since that is the right that protects all other rights, as a friend of mine will be talking to you guys about a little bit later. To that end, the NCCPA is hosting rallies just like this. Most of them have already concluded around the nation to support our communities by giving you all the opportunity to show your support for your Second Amendment rights. Now, I would wager that most of us here could recite the Second Amendment from memory. Say it with me. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Those of us who love the Constitution are often accused of only caring about that last half of the Second Amendment. We're told that if we would only read the first half, that we would understand that it's not talking about us at all. It's talking about the militia. It's talking about the National Guard, and it has nothing to do with the right of individual citizens to own a firearm. But we know better, right? We know the people in the last half of the amendment are essentially the same as the militia and even as the state in the first half of the amendment. And therefore, we love the first half of the amendment just as much as we love the last half. The people in the last half of the amendment, the ones who have the right to keep and bear arms, are the same people in the First Amendment who have the right to peaceably assemble and petition their government, as we're out here doing today. The militia spoken of in the Second Amendment are not the military. They're not even the National Guard. No, the amendment to the Constitution, no amendment to the Constitution is needed to protect the right of government to have weapons. So it would make no sense to have the military have a right to keep and bear arms, or the National Guard to have a right to keep and bear arms. Rather, the militia is another word for the people. Specifically, it is a people when we assemble in the defense of our homes, of our communities, of our country, and of our liberty. Even the term state makes no sense if we understand it to mean government. It is not for government's sake that freedom must be secured. Rather, state refers to the entirety of the people as a body politic. We are a nation that is of the people, by the people, and for the people, and therefore the state is us. Yes. Therefore, we know that the Second Amendment, when properly understood, is saying that the people as individuals have the right to keep and bear arms. That this right is not to be infringed upon in the slightest, because it is we the people, when we assemble in defense of our liberty, who are necessary to securing the freedom of all of our fellow citizens. And we must have always at our disposal the tools that are necessary to function as a militia should, if the need should arise. Indeed, it is the fact that so many of us do have these tools available that will serve to keep us from needing to assemble as a militia at all. That is why we, as freedom-loving Americans, do not ignore or downplay the importance of the first half of the Second Amendment. On the contrary, not by any stretch of the imagination. Instead, we love the first half of the Second Amendment. We love it because it tells us that we are not subjects. We're not at the mercy of a government that can trample all over our rights without consequence. We love it because it tells us that so long as we have arms, no other nation will dare to set foot on American soil with the intent to conquer us. We love it because it tells us that we are not insignificant, but each and every one of us are a people with a duty. We are necessary to the security of the freedoms enjoyed by our countrymen. And so long as we stand as a deterrent against tyranny, our freedoms must be eroded by other means. Means that take much longer than by simple force. Our culture must be reshaped in the arena of ideas, by convincing people that the values that we once held dear are not valuable at all. And that's a much harder fight to make. Such an effort is underway in our nation, though. And although even as it is not being foisted upon us by force, not by brute force at any rate, we also should not combat it by the use of arms. But nevertheless, each of us is necessary in the battle taking place in this arena of ideas in order to secure the freedoms enumerated in the Constitution. Possibly one of the most detrimental blows to the general consciousness of we the people, of the freedoms that we enjoy and our duty of securing them, happened in 1903. Can anybody guess what I'm talking about? It's called the Militia Act of 1903, under which the National Guard was established. This act did not replace the citizen militia. Instead, it defined it into two parts: the organized militia, or the National Guard, and us, the unorganized militia.
We're organized.
We're pretty organized too, right? However, in so doing, this act sowed in the minds and the hearts of Americans that they were no longer necessary to the security of a free state. The National Guard now fills that role, and that we as citizens can just kick back, relax, and let the government protect our rights for us. But we should never leave the government what was intended to be the duty of every American citizen. Trench Cox famously said, "Who are the militia? Are they not ourselves? Congress shall have no power to disarm the militia. Their swords and every terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American. The unlimited power of the sword is not in the hands of either the federal or state governments, but where I trust in God, it ever will remain in the hands of the people." This reminds us that the first half of the Second Amendment, the half that outlines its purpose, also has massive implications concerning the type of arms that we ought to be able to keep and to bear. We are necessary to the security of a free state because the balance of power was always intended to remain in the favor of the people, not in the government and its standing armies. I'm as much a supporter of the military as anybody here standing. The men and women who are willing to fight and die in service to our country deserve every bit of respect and every bit of support that we can give them. That said, it was never the intent of the framers for the military to have so much power that it could be used to subjugate the people. One of the arguments made by the Federalists in order to allay the fears of the Anti-Federalists, who did not want a standing army at all, was that the standing army would be minimal, and therefore the people would always have superior might to be able to restrain it from being used against them. And since that time, threats from our enemies around the world have required us to grow our military and advance our weaponry beyond what the common man can afford to keep or safely keep in his home. There's nothing that could have been done to avoid that without leaving our nation vulnerable to the enemies abroad. That's just reality. But that has resulted in a mounting disparity between the might of our military and the arms available to the law-abiding civilian, whose duty it is to be a check on government overreach. Gun control legislation over the last 100 years has further widened that gap in our ability as citizens to stand against tyranny. We would be naive to think that this has nothing to do with why our government has been able to encroach inch by inch upon our civil rights ever since. If we are to have the ability to function as a militia was intended, which is the proper definition of well-regulated, by the way, that is functioning as intended, then it is beyond time that we merely play defense with our rights. Playing defense is just making it take longer for our rights to be taken away from us. It's merely allowing our rights to be taken away inch by inch and over a longer period of time than it does. That way it doesn't hurt as bad, like the frog boiling in the pot. It's merely trying to keep too much gun control from passing so that by the time they get the kind of guns that I own, it'll be decades down the road and I won't care anymore, because I probably won't even be around. No, it's time that we go on the offense when it comes to our rights, and that we push for legislation that will restore what has been previously taken from us. It is time we started restoring some of that parity of force between the government and the people, so that we can properly serve as a check on tyranny. It's time we push to repeal the NFA. Can I get an amen, right? It's time we push to repeal the Hughes Amendment. It's time we push to repeal every unconstitutional law that has been foisted upon us. We've been known to say not one more inch. But I'm here to tell you that unless we are actively pushing back to gain ground, then every bit of legislative change on the issue of gun control will not be in our favor. This is why every single person here, if you haven't done so already, needs to sign Initiative 1621. I'm not going to steal the thunder of my buddy Tyler over here, who's going to speak in a minute. But this initiative is important because it does exactly what I'm talking about. It represents going on the offensive. It's not merely a fight to keep what hasn't been lost, but a fight to gain back ground that has been previously taken from us. Don't waste that kind of opportunity. By all means, it is important that we stop the awful pieces of legislation that Bob Ferguson and others are trying to push through in this building behind you. Show up to those hearings. If you can't, then send written testimony. Stopping further gun control is imperative, because if we love the last half of the Second Amendment when it says, it shall not be infringed. But going on the offensive, narrowing that gap, that parity between the military might of our standing armies and the might of us as we the people, so we can properly serve as a check against government overreach, that's just as important. Because we don't just value the last half of the Second Amendment. We love the first half as well, because we know that all of us here, every single one of you who's standing out here in the rain, you're necessary to the security of a free state. Thank you very much.